Richard, couple of interesting things. The first one that let's start with how people are feeling about life in general. It's interesting. Among Michiganders, the outlook is more pessimistic for the rest of the country than it is for the state.
That's true. Right now, we've got only under 20% of the voters who view the nation going on the right track. But in Michigan, it's double. It's almost 40% of voters, or not 40, but it's up in the 30s. And they're making a difference. They're seeing a difference between how voters are viewing Michigan versus how they're viewing what's happening nationally. And that really comes down to the economy. The economy is just a central focus right now of what people are worried about, and it's inflation. And that's a whole new ball game than we're used to seeing here in Michigan.
The other thing that was really interesting, though, is that even as people were telling you that the economy was the biggest issue and they're worried about inflation, most of the people that you talked to felt that their own personal economies were either better or the same as before.
That's right. It's a huge, overwhelming majority who felt they're doing the same or better than they were in the past. Only 28% said they were doing worse. And those people said because of inflation. But boy, oh boy, people think the national economy is on the wrong track because of inflation. And there's a huge difference by age. We asked this question, do you think inflation is going to be around for years, or do you think it's a short-term thing? And 54% said they think it's going to be around for years, but they were disproportionately under the age of 50. And those are the people who have never dealt with inflation before. And if you look at people over 50, they lived through the 70s, and they understand what inflation was. And there's a big difference what it is now versus what it was then in terms of jobs. And one of the really surprising numbers in this poll is only 3% of Michiganders are really concerned about losing their jobs. This is Michigan. This is the state of jobs. We're always concerned about jobs, but not now.
What does that tell us? It's a weird disconnect to be so worried about the economy and yet not be that worried about your own personal finances and not be that worried about your own employment.
I think they're hearing one story. They're hearing a story about inflation, and they see it every single day. They see it in the gas prices. They see it in bread and milk prices. It's in front of them every day. What's not in front of them every day is the second story, that their neighbors are all employed, that there are abundant job opportunities. In fact, one of the numbers we found was that 50% of those who are 18 to 29 have shifted jobs since COVID hit. There's this great realignment occurring in the workforce because there's a lot of job opportunities right now.
Yeah. So let's move to politics. Our bread and butter, you and I. What did you learn about what feels like a very fraught and tight political year? What were the findings that you walked away with most impressed by?
Well, I think first of all we looked at motivation, and motivation is through the roof on both sides of the aisle. And it is increasingly through the roof with Democratic women because of the threat of Roe v. Wade being overturned. 61% of them are more likely to vote, they said, are more motivated to vote if Roe v. Wade is overturned. So turnout-wise, this is going to look like 18 and 20. It's not going to look like 14 or 16 with low turnouts. People are going to vote. Joe Biden's numbers, there's no way to say it, they're abysmal in Michigan. 36% approval. They have decreased again, and they've decreased particularly with independents, where only 19% of independents approve of the job he's doing. Comparatively, Governor Whitmer, she's still above water at 48-40. She's in the upper 40s where she's always been. She's not at 50, which should concern her. It shows this is going to be a close, tight-fought race. But, one of the really interesting numbers I saw in those for Governor Whitmer was 25% of leaning Republican voters have a favorable view of the job she's doing. And if you look specifically, 42% of leaning Republican women have a favorable view of the job she's doing. And, all my political career, we've all talked about the pro-choice moderate women of Oakland County, and that's what we're looking at. And for the first time, it's not going to be an existential question about Roe v. Wade. It's going to be a real question about the existence of it.
The poll included, you talked about Roe v. Wade in the poll, it was done before what happened in Uvalde. And I'm wondering if does that change, do you think, the outlook, given all the concentration right now and talk about guns in America?
I think it absolutely does. I mean, polls are a moment in time. And that moment, we did this was several weeks ago before the Texas shooting. The Texas shooting is going to have an impact on numbers if we did a poll now. How long is the real question. We've been in this position before. We've seen temporary bumps due to these horrific shootings. But then the numbers tend to go back to where they were.
Yeah.
That's reality.
Many, many times now. Do you think, and this is a weird question, does it matter who the Republican candidate for governor is? Or is this simply an R and D year?
I do think it matters because independents are going to decide this race. You know, whoever the Republicans nominate, they're going to have lock solid support with the Republican base of voters. Governor Whitmer's going to be the Democrat. She's already got lock solid support there. This will be decided in the middle with independents, particularly Southeast Michigan independents, which is why we're watching that number so closely. And, you know, there's two interesting cross currents coming here. One is inflation, and one is the potential of Roe v. Wade. And now we can add, I think, the Texas shooting and gun laws. And how these cross currents play with independents is really going to decide how these elections look. But I find it hard to believe that inflation isn't going to play a really, really big role with these independents.
Somebody once said it's the economy, stupid.
That's right.
That's now a phrase that's over 20 years old, but it remains the truth, right?
Right. It's the economy. And what's interesting is they're holding Joe Biden far more accountable for inflation than they are Governor Whitmer. They see this as a Washington issue, not a Lansing issue. Yeah. But there's no way to sugarcoat the fact that if your party is in power and these economic numbers look this bad, you should be worried.
Lastly, just curious as to give me your take on all of these Republican candidates who have been kicked off the ballot over this petition signature issue.
Sheer and utter incompetence. I mean, number one rule of any campaign is get on the ballot. Get your signatures, look at your signatures, make sure they're good. I mean, this is historically unprecedented to see this many people bounced off the ballot, and don't blame it on anybody else but your own campaign. I mean, there are campaigns like Tudor Dixon, Garrett Soldano, the other Republicans, they got their signatures. These other campaigns did not. There was no plot against them. It was pure incompetence on their campaign's part.
You don't see their legal challenges having any chance?
I don't know how.
Yeah.
I just don't know how.
Yeah.
I mean, the Supreme Court refused to hear the fair and equal Michigan case. Why would they hear this case?